The signal was weak. It traveled through the cold darkness of space for 17 years before it reached the edge of the Sol system. By the time it arrived, the beings who had sent it were already dying. Their cities burned. Their children screamed. Their hope had faded into nothing but survival instincts and the desperate need to see one more sunrise. On a small moon orbiting Neptune, a listening station caught the signal. The station was old and mostly forgotten. It had been built during the early days of human expansion into the outer reaches of their solar system. Only 3 people worked there now. They spent their days monitoring ancient equipment and playing card games to pass the time. Dr. Sarah was the first to notice the anomaly. She was 53 years old, tired, and had been thinking about retirement for the past 5 years. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago. The screen in front of her showed the usual static and background noise of the universe. Then it changed. A pattern emerged from the chaos. It repeated itself, once, twice, 3 times. Sarah sat up straight in her chair. Her heart began to beat faster. She had trained for this moment 30 years ago. She had never expected it to actually happen. "James," she called out. Her voice was calm, but something in it made her colleague look up immediately. "Come look at this." James walked over slowly. He was younger than Sarah, maybe 40, with gray already spreading through his dark hair. He looked at the screen. His face went pale. "Is that what I think it is?" he asked. Sarah nodded. "Structured signal, non-natural origin, it's repeating." They stared at the screen together for a long moment. The pattern continued. It was clearly intentional. Someone, somewhere in the vast emptiness of space, was trying to communicate. "We need to contact Earth," Sarah said. The message reached Earth within hours. It was decoded within days. What it contained changed everything. The signal came from a species that called themselves the. Their language was complex, but their message was simple. They were dying. An enemy had come to their world. This enemy destroyed everything it touched. They had tried to fight. They had tried to negotiate. They had tried to run. Nothing worked. Now they were sending a signal into the void, hoping that someone, anyone, would hear them and come to help. The message included coordinates. It included images. It included sounds. The images showed beautiful cities made of white stone and blue glass. They showed forests of purple trees and oceans of liquid silver. They showed themselves. They were tall beings, thin and delicate, with skin that seemed to shimmer like moonlight. Their eyes were large and filled with what could only be described as kindness. The sounds were different. The sounds were of screaming, of explosions, of buildings falling and lives ending. The sounds were of a civilization being erased from existence. The final part of the message was a question. A simple question that had traveled 17 years through the darkness of space. "Is anyone out there? Can anyone help us?" Earth's response was immediate. The United Nations called an emergency session. Scientists worked around the clock to analyze the signal. Military leaders gathered to discuss options. Politicians argued about what to do. But while the leaders debated, something else was happening. The message had been made public. People around the world saw the images of burning cities. They heard the screams. They saw the faces of and recognized something universal in their fear and desperation. Public opinion shifted faster than anyone expected. People demanded action. They marched in the streets of every major city. They signed petitions. They called their representatives. The message was clear. Humanity would not stand by and do nothing. Within 1 month, Earth had made its decision. They would respond to the signal. They would go to help. But first, humanity needed to understand what they were facing. The had included information about their enemy in the signal. This enemy was called the Dominion. There were conquerors. They had been expanding across the galaxy for thousands of years. They moved from system to system, taking what they wanted and destroying what they did not need. Dozens of species had fallen before them. Some had been enslaved. Others had been completely wiped out. They themselves were impressive beings. They stood nearly 3 meters tall. Their bodies were covered in thick armor that had evolved over millions of years. They had 4 arms, each ending in sharp claws capable of cutting through metal. Their teeth could crush stone. Their eyes could see in complete darkness. But their physical strength was not what made them truly dangerous. They were intelligent. They were organized. They had technology that surpassed most species in the known galaxy. Their ships were fast and deadly. Their weapons could destroy entire cities in seconds. No one had ever successfully resisted them. Every species that had tried had failed. They believed themselves to be superior to all other life forms. They saw other beings as nothing more than resources to be used or obstacles to be removed. When Earth's leaders learned about some of them hesitated. Perhaps, they suggested, humanity should stay quiet. Perhaps they should hide and hope the never found Earth. Going to help them would reveal humanity's existence to the Dominion. It would make them a target. The debate lasted 3 days. In the end, it was Admiral Stone who settled the matter. Admiral Stone was 72 years old. He had fought in 3 wars. He had lost his left leg below the knee to an explosion 20 years ago. He walked with a slight limp and carried himself with the weight of a man who had seen too much death. He stood before the assembly and spoke in a voice that was quiet, but carried to every corner of the room. "I have read the reports about he said. "I have seen the images of what they do to the species they conquer. I understand the fear that some of you feel. It is a reasonable fear." He paused and looked around the room. His eyes were sharp despite his age. "But I also understand something else. I understand what happens when good people do nothing while evil spreads. I have seen it before in our own history. When we turn away from suffering, we lose a part of ourselves. We become something less than human." He took a step forward. His artificial leg clicked against the floor. "Some of you worry that helping will bring to our door. Perhaps it will. But I would rather face the darkness standing tall than hide in the shadows until it finds us anyway, because it will find us. Evil always does." He looked directly at the cameras that were broadcasting his words to every corner of Earth. "There are beings out there who are suffering. They called for help. They called across the vastness of space, hoping that someone would answer. We heard them. The question is not whether we can help. The question is what kind of people we want to be." The vote happened that same day. Humanity would respond to the signal. They would go to help they would face the Dominion. Preparations began immediately. Earth's fleet was not designed for this kind of mission. Most of their ships were built for transport and exploration. They had weapons, but they were primarily defensive. No one had expected humanity to fight a war against an alien empire. But humans were adaptable. They always had been. Factories that had been producing civilian goods were converted to military production. Scientists who had been studying theoretical physics were now designing new weapons. Engineers who had been building space stations were now reinforcing warships. The entire planet united in a way it never had before. Old conflicts were set aside. Resources were shared. Knowledge was pooled. For the first time in human history, there was truly one human race working toward one goal. And during this preparation, something interesting happened. Other species began to take notice. Earth was not alone in the galaxy. Humans had made contact with several other civilizations over the past century. Most of these species were peaceful. They traded with each other. They shared scientific discoveries. They maintained diplomatic relationships. But none of them had ever challenged When word spread that humanity intended to go to war against the Dominion, the reaction from other species was a mixture of confusion and concern. Some thought humans were insane. Others thought they were simply ignorant of what they were capable of. Ambassador of the Collective requested an urgent meeting with Earth's leaders. They were one of the oldest species humanity had encountered. They had survived for millions of years by being careful and avoiding conflict. Ambassador was a being of pure energy contained within a crystalline shell. When he spoke, his voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "We have received reports of your intentions," he said. "We must advise you against this course of action. The cannot be defeated. Many have tried, all have failed." The human representative, a woman named Director, listened patiently. When Ambassador finished speaking, she smiled slightly. "We appreciate your concern," she said, "but our decision is made." "You do not understand," Ambassador insisted. "They are ancient, they are powerful, your species is young. You have been traveling among the stars for barely 2 centuries, they have been conquering for." Director nodded. "All true, but tell me something, Ambassador. How old was humanity when we first split the atom? How old were we when we first left our planet? How old were we when we cured diseases that had plagued us for thousands of years?" Ambassador did not respond. "Humanity has always faced challenges that should have destroyed us," Director continued. "We have faced ice ages and plagues. We have faced wars and famines. We have faced our own worst impulses. And yet here we are, still standing, still fighting, still reaching for the stars." She leaned forward slightly. "The called for help," we answered. "The may be powerful, but so are we. And more importantly, we are willing to fight for what is right. Can your species say the same?" Ambassador was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, and his voice carried something that might have been respect. "Your species is strange," he said. "You come from a world of extremes, a world of fire and ice, a world where the ground shakes and the sky rages. We have studied your planet. It is a place of death." Director smiled. "We call it home." "Indeed," Ambassador said. "That is precisely what makes you so unusual. You evolved on perhaps that is why you think you can face the—" "Perhaps," Director agreed. "Or perhaps it's simply because someone asked for help and we believe that matters." The meeting ended without resolution. Ambassador returned to his people to deliver his report. Other species watched and waited to see what would happen. Meanwhile, on Earth, the preparations continued. The fleet that humanity assembled was unlike anything they had ever built before. There were 67 warships of various sizes. The largest was the UNS Defiance, a massive vessel nearly 2 kilometers long. It carried enough firepower to destroy a small moon. But the ships were only part of the force. Humanity also prepared ground troops. These were volunteers from every nation on Earth, men and women who were willing to fight and die for people they had never met, on a world they had never seen. Among these volunteers was a young man named David. He was 24 years old, born in Nigeria, and had been training as a soldier for 6 years. When he heard about the mission to help he signed up immediately. His mother cried when he told her. His father, a veteran himself, simply nodded and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Why?" his mother asked. "Why do you have to go? It's not our fight." David thought about it for a moment. "I saw the images," he said. "The cities burning, the people running. I saw the fear in their eyes. They look different from us, but that fear is the same. It's the same fear anyone feels when their world is being destroyed." He took his mother's hands in his. "If our world was burning and we sent a signal into space asking for help, wouldn't you want someone to answer? Wouldn't you want someone to come?" His mother could not argue with that. She hugged him tightly and let him go. David was assigned to the 42nd Infantry Division, which was stationed aboard the UNS Hope. The Hope was a medium-sized transport ship designed to carry troops to the surface of planets. It was not heavily armed, but it was fast and maneuverable. The soldiers aboard the Hope spent the long journey training. They learned about they studied their tactics. They practiced fighting in low gravity and high gravity and zero gravity. They prepared for everything they could imagine and many things they could not. The journey to the system took 8 months. During that time, the situation on Prime continued to deteriorate. They had established a foothold on the planet's largest continent. They were methodically moving outward, destroying everything in their path. The military had been shattered in the first weeks of the invasion. Now only scattered resistance groups remained, fighting a losing battle against overwhelming odds. Queen of the watched the destruction from her hidden bunker deep beneath the surface of her world. She had been a young queen when they came. Now, after 2 years of war, she looked decades older. Her advisors had stopped giving her hopeful reports long ago. Now they simply told her the truth. Another city had fallen. Another million of her people were dead or enslaved. The end was coming. When the message arrived that a response had been received from the ancient signal, Queen did not believe it at first. The signal had been sent in desperation, a last cry for help into the void. She had not truly expected anyone to answer. "They are called humans," her communications officer reported. "They come from a world called Earth. They say they are coming to help." "How long?" Queen asked. "Their message says 8 months from when it was sent. Based on the transmission delay, that means they could arrive in approximately 6 months." 6 months? Could her people survive 6 more months? "What do we know about these humans?" she asked. The information was limited. They had never encountered humans before. They had only legends and rumors passed through the galactic network of communication. "They come from the officer said, "a planet with extreme conditions, violent weather, active geology, high gravity compared to most inhabited worlds." Queen whispered. She had heard the term before. Most civilizations in the galaxy evolved on stable, comfortable planets, worlds with gentle climates and predictable conditions. But some species came from places that were hostile to life itself. These were rare and often viewed with a mixture of fear and fascination. "Can they really help us?" she asked, though she knew no one could answer that question. "They say they are bringing a fleet," the officer replied. 67 warships and over 100,000 soldiers. It was not enough. Queen knew it was not enough. They had thousands of ships, millions of soldiers. The human force would be destroyed. But it was something. It was hope. And hope was all her people had left. "Tell our remaining forces," she said. "Tell them help is coming. Tell them to hold on." The message spread across Prime. It passed from hiding place to hiding place, from resistance cell to resistance cell. Help was coming. The humans were coming. Nobody knew if it would make a difference. But for the first time in 2 years, they had something to fight for besides survival. They had hope. High Commander Vex of the Dominion received the report about the approaching human fleet with amusement. He was an old warrior, with scars covering his armored body from countless battles. He had conquered worlds. He had destroyed species. He had never been defeated. "Humans," he said, tasting the word. "I have heard of them, young species, barely out of their own system. They have assembled 67 warships," his subordinate reported. Vex made a sound that might have been laughter. 67. We have over 2,000 ships in this sector alone. What do they hope to accomplish?" "Unknown, High Commander. Perhaps they seek to negotiate." "They do not send fleets to negotiate," Vex said. "They are coming to fight, foolish but admirable in a primitive way." He considered the situation. The conquest of Prime was nearly complete. Within a few months, the last of the resistance would be crushed. The planet's resources would belong to the Dominion. Its people would be slaves or corpses. The arrival of the human fleet was unexpected, but ultimately irrelevant. They would be destroyed along with the. Perhaps their ships would provide some useful technology. Perhaps their soldiers would provide some entertainment before they died. "Do not change our plans," Vex ordered. "Continue the conquest. When the humans arrive, we will crush them as we have crushed everyone else." "Yes, High Commander." Vex returned to his thoughts. He was curious about these humans. Species that came from were known to be more resilient than others, more aggressive, more unpredictable. It might make for an interesting battle. But in the end, the result would be the same. They had never lost. They never would. 6 months later, the human fleet entered the system. Admiral Stone stood on the bridge of the UNS Defiance and looked at the planet before him. Even from space, he could see the scars. Vast areas of the surface were burned black. Cities that had once sparkled were now ruins. Smoke rose from a dozen locations visible to the naked eye. "Status report," he said quietly. His tactical officer, a young woman named Lieutenant Commander, no relation to the Sarah who had first detected the signal, responded immediately. "Multiple vessels detected in orbit. Current count is approximately 200 warships. Additional ships are positioned throughout the system. Ground forces are heavily concentrated on the main continent." 200 warships, Admiral Stone repeated, "and they have thousands more they can call." "Yes, sir." Stone nodded slowly. He had known the odds before they left Earth. He had accepted them. So had everyone else in the fleet. "Open a channel to the command ship," he said. There was a pause, then, "Channel open, sir." Stone took a deep breath. His artificial leg ached as it always did when he was stressed. He ignored it. "Dominion forces," he said, his voice calm and clear. "This is Admiral Stone of the United Nations Space Fleet. We have come in response to a distress signal from the people. We demand that you cease all hostile operations immediately and withdraw from this system." He paused, knowing that his next words would determine the course of history. "If you refuse, we will be forced to take action. You have 1 hour to respond." The channel closed. Stone turned to his officers. "They won't negotiate," he said. "I want all ships at combat readiness. Ground forces prepare for deployment. We go in 1 hour whether they respond or not." Across the fleet, 67 ships came alive with activity. Weapons were armed. Shields were activated. Soldiers made final preparations. In the cargo bay of the UNS Hope, David checked his equipment for the 100th time. His rifle was clean and functional. His armor was sealed and tested. His medical kit was complete. Around him, his fellow soldiers did the same. They were quiet, focused. Many of them were scared. All of them were determined. "You ready for this?" asked a woman from Brazil named Maria Santos. David thought about it. "No," he said honestly, "but I'm going anyway." Maria smiled slightly. "Same here." In her bunker beneath the surface of Prime, Queen received word that the human fleet had arrived. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer to God she had stopped believing in 2 years ago. Help had come. Now all they could do was wait and see if it would be enough. The hour passed slowly. No response came from the. Admiral Stone had expected this. He gave the order. "All ships engage." The first battle between humanity and the Dominion began. And across the galaxy, countless civilizations watched with a mixture of curiosity and dread. They had seen species challenge the before. They had seen those species destroyed. Perhaps the humans would be different. Perhaps not. Either way, everything was about to change. The first shot of the battle came from the UNS Defiance. A beam of concentrated energy lanced across the void and struck a destroyer head-on. The alien ship's shields flickered, then failed. A second shot tore through its hull. The destroyer exploded in a brilliant flash of light and debris. High Commander Vex watched the destruction of the destroyer with surprise. He had expected the human weapons to be primitive. The beam that had just killed 300 of his warriors was anything but. "Return fire," he ordered. "All ships engage." The fleet responded with overwhelming force. 200 warships opened fire simultaneously. Space itself seemed to burn as countless weapons discharged toward the human fleet. But the human ships were not where they expected them to be. Human naval tactics were based on centuries of experience. From the ancient wooden ships of Earth's oceans to the modern vessels of space, humans had learned one fundamental truth about warfare: never stay still, never be predictable, never fight the battle your enemy expects. The human fleet scattered in a complex pattern that looked like chaos but was actually perfectly coordinated. Ships that had been in one position disappeared and reappeared in another. The weapons' fire, aimed at where the humans had been, struck empty space. Admiral Stone allowed himself a small smile. They were used to enemies who fought in formation, enemies who stood their ground and tried to match firepower with firepower. That approach had never worked against the Dominion, and other species kept trying it anyway. Humans did things differently. Attack Pattern Delta, Stone ordered. Focus fire on their command ships. Ignore the smaller vessels for now. The human fleet reorganized in seconds. 67 ships became 67 individual predators, each one moving with purpose and deadly intent. They did not try to match the in numbers or raw firepower. Instead, they used speed and precision to strike at specific targets. The UNS Defiance and 4 other heavy cruisers concentrated their fire on a battle cruiser. The alien ship was massive, easily 5 times the size of the Defiance. Its shields were the strongest the possessed. It should have been able to withstand anything the humans could throw at it. The first volley of human weapons fire hammered the battle cruiser's shields. The shields held, but barely. The second volley followed immediately before the shields could regenerate. Then the third, the fourth. Human weapons technology had advanced rapidly in the years following first contact with alien civilizations. They had learned from other species. They had improved upon what they learned. Most importantly, they had combined alien knowledge with human creativity in ways that no one had expected. The battle cruiser's shields collapsed under the sustained assault. Before they could react, a final volley tore into the hull. The ship broke apart, spilling atmosphere and bodies into space. High Commander Vex felt something he had not experienced in centuries: concern. "They are more dangerous than our intelligence suggested," he said to his subordinates. "Adjust tactics. Do not let them concentrate fire on single targets." The fleet spread out, trying to prevent the humans from focusing their attacks. But this created new opportunities. Human destroyers, smaller and faster than anything in the fleet, slipped through the gaps. They launched missiles at point-blank range and disappeared before they could respond. The battle was not one-sided. There were experienced warriors with superior numbers. Human ships began taking damage. The UNS Courage lost its main engine to an energy weapon. The UNS Freedom suffered a direct hit to its weapons array. 3 smaller frigates were destroyed outright, their crews dying in flashes of fire and vacuum. But for every human ship that fell, 2 or 3 vessels were destroyed or disabled. The ratio was unprecedented. No species had ever inflicted such losses on the Dominion in direct combat. On the bridge of the Defiance, Admiral Stone monitored the battle with grim satisfaction. They were winning, so far. "Sir," Lieutenant Commander reported, "enemy reinforcements detected. Approximately 500 additional ships are approaching from the far side of the system." Stone nodded. He had expected this. "Time until they arrive." 2 hours, sir." "Then we have 2 hours to accomplish our primary objective." He opened a channel to the transport ships. "Ground forces, prepare for deployment. We're going in." The UNS Hope and its sister ships began their descent toward the surface of Prime. They were escorted by a screen of fighters and destroyers, but their path was not unopposed. Interceptors rose from the planet's surface to meet them. David felt the transport shake as weapons fire struck its shields. Through the small viewport near his seat, he could see explosions in the distance. Ships dying, people dying. 2 minutes to landing zone, the pilot announced over the intercom. "It's going to be hot, people." David gripped his rifle. Beside him, Maria Santos was praying quietly in Portuguese. Across the aisle, a sergeant named Williams was checking his equipment for the 10th time in as many minutes. The transport shook again, harder this time. Warning lights flashed. Something in the engine compartment made a sound that no engine should ever make. "We're hit," the pilot reported, his voice still calm. "Losing altitude faster than planned. Adjusting landing site. New destination is 3 kilometers north of original target." 3 kilometers. That meant they would have to fight their way to their objective through enemy territory. David had trained for this possibility. Everyone had. But training and reality were very different things. The transport crashed more than landed. It came down hard in a field of purple grass, sliding across the ground and tearing a deep furrow in the soil. When it finally stopped, David was hanging upside down in his restraints, his head pounding and blood dripping from a cut on his forehead. "Move, move, everyone out," Sergeant Williams was shouting. He was already out of his seat, kicking open the emergency exit. David fumbled with his restraints and fell to what was now the floor. His training took over. "Get up, check your weapon, move toward the exit, do not stop, do not think, just move." He emerged from the crashed transport into an alien world. The sky was a shade of green he had never seen before. The grass beneath his feet was soft and smelled like nothing from Earth. In the distance, a city burned. "Form up defensive perimeter," Williams ordered. The soldiers spread out around the crashed transport. There were 47 of them now. 3 had not survived the crash. David took a position behind a small rise in the ground. He looked through the scope of his rifle and saw movement in the distance. Large shapes, moving toward them. "Contact," he reported. "Multiple hostiles bearing northwest, range approximately 800 meters. "I see them," Williams confirmed. "Hold fire until they're within effective range. Make every shot count." The soldiers came fast. They moved in a formation that was clearly practiced, using the terrain for cover while advancing steadily. David counted at least 50 of them, more than the human squad. Each one was 3 meters tall and covered in natural armor that could stop most conventional weapons. But human weapons were not conventional. "Open fire," Williams ordered. David squeezed his trigger. His rifle was a marvel of human engineering. It fired kinetic projectiles accelerated to incredible speeds by magnetic rails. The rounds were made of a tungsten alloy and designed to penetrate armor. The first soldier he hit stumbled but did not fall. The alien's armor had partially deflected the shot. David adjusted his aim and fired again. This time he hit the joint between the armor plates at the creature's neck. The dropped. All around him, his were doing the same. The initial volley of human fire killed 8 and wounded several more. The aliens responded with weapons of their own. Energy beams sizzled through the air, striking the ground and sending up sprays of dirt and vegetation. A soldier named Thomas took a direct hit. His armor protected him from death, but the impact threw him backward and he did not get up. Maria Santos crawled over to him, pulling out her medical kit while still firing her pistol with her other hand. "Grenades," Williams shouted. David pulled a fragmentation grenade from his belt and threw it with all his strength. The explosion caught 3 in its radius. 2 of them went down. The third kept coming, its armor shredded but its fury undiminished. The battle was chaos, fire and noise and death. David lost track of how many times he shot, how many fell, how many of his own people were hit. Time became meaningless. There was only the next shot, the next target, the next breath. And then suddenly it was over. The last soldier fell with 4 bullets in its chest. The survivors of David's squad stood among the bodies of their enemies and their friends, breathing hard and bleeding from a dozen wounds. 14 humans had died. 43 lay dead or dying on the alien grass. "Report," Williams said. His voice was hoarse. 7 wounded, Maria reported. 3 serious. We need evacuation for them." "Evacuation isn't coming," Williams replied. "Not for a while. We move to the primary objective on foot. Those who can't walk we carry." David looked at the soldiers around him. They were exhausted, they were scared, they were hurt, but they were still standing, they were still ready to fight. This was why humans were called, he realized. Not because they were the strongest or the fastest, not because they had the best weapons or the most advanced technology, but because they simply refused to give up. They had evolved on a world that tried to kill them every day, and they had learned to keep going no matter what. "Let's move," he said. The squad gathered their wounded and began the long march toward the city. Above them, the space battle continued. Admiral Stone had lost 11 ships now, with many more damaged, but the had lost nearly 80. The ratio remained heavily in humanity's favor, but the math was still against them. With 500 enemy reinforcements approaching, they could not sustain these losses for long. "Admiral," reported, "the transport ships have all reached the surface. Ground forces are engaging the enemy across multiple locations." "Good. What's the status of the orbital bombardment platforms?" "We've identified 17 platforms. 5 have been destroyed. The remaining 12 are still operational." Those platforms were the key. They used them to bombard any concentration of resistance from orbit. As long as they existed, the ground forces could not establish a secure position. "Redirect the second attack group to focus on the platforms," Stone ordered. "I want them all destroyed within the next hour." "Yes, sir." The battle shifted again. Human ships, now operating with desperate efficiency, targeted the orbital platforms. They tried to defend them but were forced to spread their forces too thin. One by one, the platforms fell. On the surface, the effect was immediate. Resistance fighters who had been hiding in bunkers and caves emerged to join the battle. They were armed with whatever weapons they had managed to salvage or create. Most of their equipment was primitive compared to human or technology, but they knew the terrain, they knew the enemy, and they were fighting for their home. Queen received reports of the human advance with tears in her eyes. They were actually doing it. These strange beings from a distance were actually fighting and winning. "I want to speak to their commander," she said. Her communications officer established contact with the human ground forces. The face that appeared on her screen was not what she expected. It was a woman, middle-aged, with dark skin and gray hair. Her eyes were tired but determined. "Your Majesty," the woman said, "I'm General Elizabeth, Commander of Human Ground Forces. We're honored to fight alongside your people." "General," Queen replied, "I do not have words to express what your arrival means to us. We had lost all hope." "Then it's time to find it again," General said. "We're pushing toward your capital city. Our objective is to link up with your remaining forces and establish a defensive perimeter. Can you coordinate with us?" "Yes, we will do whatever we can." The alliance was formed in that moment. Human soldiers and fighters began to work together, combining human firepower with knowledge. The results were devastating for the High Commander Vex watched his carefully planned conquest unravel. In all his centuries of warfare, he had never seen anything like this. The humans fought like demons. They took wounds that would kill most species and kept fighting. They adapted to new situations instantly. They supported each other with a loyalty that seemed almost suicidal. And they inspired the species that Vex had almost completely crushed was now rising up with renewed fury. Reports came in of attacks on positions throughout the planet. Supply lines were being cut. Communications were being disrupted. The systematic conquest that Vex had orchestrated was becoming a chaotic mess. "This is unacceptable," he growled. "I want those humans destroyed, all of them." "High Commander," one of his subordinates said carefully, "our reinforcements will arrive soon. Perhaps we should wait for them before committing more forces." Vex turned his massive head slowly. His eyes, adapted for seeing in darkness, seemed to glow with inner fire. "We do not wait," he said. "The do not wait, we attack, we conquer, we destroy. That is our way. That has always been our way." He turned to his tactical display. "Deploy the reserve forces. Every soldier we have on this planet will engage the humans, and prepare my personal guard. I will lead the attack myself." "High Commander, that is." "That is my decision," Vex interrupted. "These humans think they can challenge the Dominion. I will show them what happens to those who dare." David and what remained of his squad reached the outskirts of the capital city 3 hours after their transport crashed. They had fought through 2 more groups of soldiers. They had lost 4 more people. They had saved a group of civilians who had been hiding in a collapsed building. The civilians were strange beings, tall and thin, with luminous skin and large, expressive eyes. They spoke a language that David's translator struggled to interpret, but their gratitude needed no translation. One of them, a child no bigger than David's little sister back on Earth, had hugged his leg and refused to let go for several minutes. Now the squad was approaching their objective, the former government center, now occupied by forces. Intelligence suggested that important enemy commanders were located there. Taking or destroying that building could cripple operations in the entire region. "What's our strength?" Williams asked as they took cover in an abandoned structure. 23 combat effective, Maria reported. Another 4 walking wounded, 3 stretcher cases. 30 soldiers. The building they were supposed to assault was defended by an estimated 200. "We need reinforcements," Williams said. "Third platoon is converging on our position," came a voice over the radio. It was Lieutenant Park, the company's executive officer. "ETA 15 minutes. Also, we've got air support incoming. 2 gunships. They'll hit the building just before we go in." "Understood," Williams replied. He turned to his squad. 15 minutes, people. Rest while you can. Eat something. Drink water. Check your weapons. When those gunships hit, we're going in hard and fast." David sat down against a wall and closed his eyes. His body ached in places he had not known could ache. His hands were still shaking from adrenaline. He had killed more intelligent beings today than he could count. The weight of that pressed down on him. But then he thought about the child who had hugged his leg, the fear in her eyes, the hope when she realized that someone had come to help. This was why they were here. This was why it mattered. He opened his eyes and checked his rifle one more time. The gunships arrived exactly on schedule. They were human aircraft designed for close air support, equipped with missiles and rapid-fire cannons. They came in low and fast, screaming over the city toward the target building. They saw them coming. Anti-aircraft fire rose up from multiple positions. One gunship took a hit and began trailing smoke, but it kept flying. Both aircraft released their weapons simultaneously. The front of the government building exploded inward. Windows shattered. Walls collapsed. Soldiers who had been defending the perimeter were thrown through the air by the blast. "Go, go, go," Williams shouted. David was running before he consciously decided to move. His squad was beside him, spread out in a combat formation. Third platoon was approaching from the other side. More than 60 human soldiers converging on a building that was now burning and filled with chaos. The assault was brutal and efficient. Human soldiers moved through the rubble in teams, covering each other, clearing rooms, killing any who resisted. The aliens were disoriented from the gunship attack, their command structure disrupted, their communications jammed by human electronic warfare. David was the first through a door on the second floor. His rifle came up instinctively. 3 were inside. He fired twice, then twice more. Maria was behind him, finishing the third with a burst of automatic fire. "Clear," David called. They moved to the next room, and the next, and the next. Halfway through the building, they found something unexpected. A group of prisoners. They were in terrible condition. Thin, wounded, barely alive. One of them was wearing the tattered remains of what had once been an official uniform. "Governor," one of them whispered, "the Queen's cousin." The governor was barely conscious. He looked up at David with eyes that had seen too much suffering. "You came," he said weakly. "You actually came." "We came," David confirmed. "Can you walk?" "I do not know, but I will try." They helped the governor and the other prisoners to their feet. Maria organized them into a group that could be escorted out of the building while the assault continued. "Get them out of here," Williams ordered. "The rest of you keep moving. We need to find the enemy commanders." They found them on the top floor. 3 officers were attempting to escape through a hidden passage. Human soldiers cut them off. "Surrender," Williams called out. "You have nowhere to go." The lead officer, a being with more scars than David had ever seen on any creature, made a sound that might have been laughter. "Do not surrender," he said. "We fight, we conquer, we die, but we never surrender." He raised his weapon. Williams shot him before he could fire. The other 2 were taken down by the soldiers behind them. "Building secure," Williams reported over the radio. "Enemy commanders eliminated, prisoners recovered." The response came from General herself. "Well done, hold your position. We're sending reinforcements to establish a permanent presence. You've done excellent work today." David sat down heavily on the floor of the conquered building. Around him, his were doing the same. They were exhausted beyond words. They had fought harder than they had ever trained for. They had lost friends. But they had won. Outside, the battle continued. In orbit, Admiral Stone's fleet was still fighting against overwhelming odds. On the ground, human soldiers were still dying alongside fighters. The war was far from over. But something had changed. The Dominion, for the first time in thousands of years, was losing. High Commander Vex led his personal guard into battle as night fell on the capital city. He was the most decorated warrior in the Dominion. He had personally killed thousands of enemies across dozens of worlds. He had never been defeated in personal combat. He found a group of human soldiers defending a barricade at a major intersection. There were perhaps 30 of them. His personal guard numbered 200. "Watch," he told his soldiers. "Watch how a true warrior fights." He strode toward the barricade alone, his massive form silhouetted against the fires burning throughout the city. The humans saw him coming. They opened fire. The bullets struck his armor and bounced off. Vex had worn this armor for 3 centuries. It was made of materials that could withstand almost anything. He continued walking, ignoring the impacts like raindrops. "Your weapons cannot harm me," he called out. "Your species is young and weak. You should have stayed on your end hidden until we came for you." He reached the barricade and swung his massive arm. The barrier exploded. Human soldiers were thrown backward. Vex grabbed one of them and lifted him into the air. "This is what happens to those who challenge the Dominion," he said. A shot rang out. Vex felt something penetrate his armor near his shoulder. Pain, sharp and unexpected, flooded through him. He dropped the soldier and turned to see who had wounded him. A human woman stood 20 meters away. She was holding a weapon unlike any Vex had seen before. A long rifle with a scope and a barrel that still smoked from its single shot. "Your armor is impressive," the woman said calmly. "But I've been shooting things since before I could read, and nothing has armor everywhere." She fired again. The shot struck the joint at Vex's knee, exactly where the armor was weakest. He fell. His guards surged forward to protect him. The battle erupted in full force. But Vex, for the first time in centuries, was bleeding on the ground, wounded by a creature he had dismissed as primitive. He looked up at the green sky of Prime and felt something that he had not experienced since he was a young warrior. Fear. These humans were not what he had expected. They were not what anyone had expected. They came from a world of death, and they had brought that death with them across the stars. The reinforcements he had called for were still hours away. His personal guard was being pushed back by a force half their size. The conquest that should have been simple was becoming a disaster. For the first time in his long life, High Commander Vex wondered if they could actually lose. Far away, watching from her bunker, Queen witnessed the battle through surveillance drones. She saw the commander fall. She saw human soldiers pushing forward against impossible odds. She saw her own people rising up to fight alongside their unexpected allies. And she wept, not from sorrow, but from something she had almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. The reinforcements arrived at dawn. 500 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system, their weapons already charging. The commander of this fleet was Supreme Admiral, second only to the Emperor himself in military authority. He had been sent to finish what High Commander Vex had failed to complete. Admiral Stone saw the enemy fleet appear on his tactical display and felt his heart sink. His fleet had been fighting for almost 20 hours straight. They had lost 18 ships. Many more were damaged. His crews were exhausted. Ammunition was running low. And now 500 fresh enemy warships had arrived. All ships fall back to defensive positions, Stone ordered. His voice was calm despite the despair he felt. Form up around the transports. We protect the ground forces at all costs. The human fleet retreated toward the planet. It was not a rout. It was a controlled withdrawal, fighting all the way. But the outcome was no longer in doubt. Against 700 enemy ships, the remaining human force could not hold for long. On the surface, General received the news with grim acceptance. She had known this was a possibility from the beginning. They had come to help the knowing they might not survive. "What are our options?" she asked her staff. "None of them are good," her operations officer replied. "We can try to evacuate as many troops as possible, but we'll lose most of our people in the attempt. We can dig in and fight to the last, but that just delays the inevitable. Or we can surrender." "Surrender is not an option," said firmly. "Don't take prisoners, at least not ones that live very long." She looked at the map showing human and positions across the planet. They had made incredible progress in the past day. Major cities had been liberated. Enemy forces had been pushed back on multiple fronts. It would all be for nothing if they could bring their full force to bear from orbit. "Get me Admiral Stone," she said. Stone's face appeared on her screen moments later. He looked older than he had when they left Earth. The weight of command had taken its toll. "General," he said, "I assume you've heard." "I have. What's your assessment?" "Honestly, we can hold for maybe another 6 to 8 hours. After that, they'll break through our defensive line and have orbital superiority. Once that happens, they'll bombard every position we've established on the surface." Nodded slowly. "Then we have 6 to 8 hours to find another way." "There is no other way, Elizabeth." Stone's use of her first name told her how serious he was. "We gave them a fight. We hurt them badly, but there are just too many of them." "There's always another way," insisted. "We just haven't found it yet." Stone was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled slightly. "You're right, we haven't, so let's find it." They began to strategize. It was desperate work. Every option seemed to lead to the same outcome. The numbers were simply too overwhelming. Human technology was advanced, but it could not overcome a numerical disadvantage of more than 10 to 1. While the commanders strategized, the soldiers on the ground kept fighting. David and his squad had been reassigned to help defend a critical supply depot on the outskirts of the capital. The depot contained weapons, medical supplies, and food. It was essential to the continued resistance. They attacked at noon. They came in force, hundreds of soldiers supported by armored vehicles and air support. The human defenders numbered less than 100. "Here they come," Williams said, his voice tired but steady. "Make every shot count. We hold this position or we die trying. David had stopped being afraid somewhere during the previous night. Fear required energy, and he had none left. There was only determination now, a cold, hard resolve to keep fighting until he could not fight anymore. The battle was intense from the first moment. Soldiers charged forward in waves, seemingly unconcerned about their own casualties. Human defenders cut them down with precise fire, but more kept coming. A vehicle broke through the outer perimeter. Its weapons tore into the human positions, killing 5 soldiers in seconds. David saw Maria Santos go down, her body thrown backward by the blast. Something inside him snapped. He grabbed a rocket launcher from a fallen comrade and stepped into the open. The vehicle turned its weapons toward him. He fired before it could shoot. The rocket struck the vehicle's weak point. It exploded in a ball of fire. David was thrown backward by the shockwave, his armor smoking and his ears ringing. He got up. He walked over to Maria. She was alive, barely. Her armor had absorbed most of the damage, but she was unconscious and bleeding from multiple wounds. "Medic," David shouted. "I need a medic here." A corpsman rushed over and began treating Maria's wounds. David turned back to the battle. More were coming, always more. He picked up his rifle and started shooting again. In orbit, the situation had grown even more desperate. The reinforcement fleet had joined the battle. Human ships were being destroyed at an accelerating rate. Admiral Stone had moved the Defiance to the front of the defensive line, using his flagship as a shield for the transports. "Hull breach on Deck 12, the damage control officer reported. "Casualty count unknown. Fire teams are responding." "Maintain course," Stone ordered. "Keep our transports covered." Another volley struck the Defiance. The ship shuddered. Warning alarms blared throughout the bridge. "Admiral," said, her voice carrying a strange note, "I'm detecting multiple new contacts at the edge of the system." Stone felt his heart stop. More if so, this was truly the end. "Identification." Stared at her display for a long moment. Then she looked up at Stone with an expression of utter disbelief. "Sir, they're not. IFF tags are coming through now." She paused, reading the data. "Admiral, those are ships, and there are others. I'm reading consortium vessels, trade alliance cruisers, even a few ships from the Outer Rim Coalition." Stone could not process what he was hearing. "How many ships total?" "Still counting, sir. Current estimate is over 300 and rising." 300 ships, from species that had never stood against the species that had watched the Dominion conquer and destroy without lifting a finger to stop them. An incoming transmission appeared on the main screen. It was Ambassador, the who had advised humanity against this very mission. "Admiral Stone," said, "I told you that many species had tried to challenge thee and failed, but I did not tell you the whole truth. The reason we failed was not because we lacked strength. It was because we lacked courage. We were afraid to stand together, afraid to risk everything for what was right." The crystalline being's voice carried something that might have been shame. "Your species showed us what we had forgotten, that some things are worth fighting for, even if victory is not certain. When you answered the call, you showed the entire galaxy that courage still exists in the universe." More ships were appearing on the tactical display. The count was now over 400 and still climbing. "We will not let you fight alone," continued. "Not anymore. The galaxy stands with Earth." For a moment, Admiral Stone could not speak. He had come here expecting to die, expecting all of his people to die. They had come anyway because it was the right thing to do. And now the universe was answering. "Thank you, Ambassador," Stone finally managed to say. "Thank you all." He turned to his tactical officer. "Coordinate with the incoming fleet. Let's show the Dominion what happens when you push the galaxy too far." Supreme Admiral watched the arrival of the Allied fleet with something approaching shock. In all his years of service, he had never seen anything like this. Dozens of species that had never worked together were now forming a united battle line. "This changes nothing," he declared, though his voice carried less certainty than before. "We still outnumber them. We are still the Dominion." "Supreme Admiral," one of his officers said carefully, "our communications indicate that more ships are en route, at least 100 more from various species." The numbers were shifting. What had been an overwhelming advantage was becoming something closer to equality, and knew that in battle, morale and unity could overcome raw numbers. The Allied fleet attacked before could fully organize his forces. Human ships led the charge, but they were no longer alone. Energy weapons tore into vessels. Consortium missiles overwhelmed enemy point defense systems. Ships from species that had been victims of the Dominion for thousands of years finally fought back with all the accumulated rage of generations. The battle became chaos. Ship-to-ship combat spread across the entire system. Thousands of vessels locked in deadly combat, their weapons lighting up the void like a deadly aurora. Admiral Stone led the human contingent in a direct assault on the command ship. The UNS Defiance was battered and bleeding atmosphere from multiple breaches, but its weapons still fired. Its crew still fought. "All batteries target the enemy flagship," Stone ordered. "Everything we have." The Defiance unleashed its full arsenal. Other human ships joined the attack. Vessels added their fire. The concentrated assault was unlike anything they had ever faced. Supreme Admiral's flagship began to break apart. Its shields failed. Its hull cracked. Its systems overloaded one by one. "Abandon ship," ordered, his voice hollow. He could not believe what was happening. The Dominion had not lost a major space battle in centuries. Now their flagship was being destroyed by a coalition of species that should have been too afraid to fight. Escape pods launched from the dying ship managed to reach one just before the flagship exploded. As he was carried away by the blast wave, he looked back at the battle and saw something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The fleet was retreating, not reforming, not regrouping, retreating, running from the battlefield for the first time in recorded history. On the surface of Prime, the effects were immediate. Ground forces, cut off from orbital support and facing a suddenly energized enemy, began to fall back. Their disciplined advance became a fighting retreat. Their fighting retreat became a rout. David watched in disbelief as soldiers ran. Actually ran. He had fought these beings for almost 2 days. He had seen them march into certain death without hesitation. He had thought they were incapable of fear. But they were afraid now. Whatever was happening in orbit had broken something in them. The invincible Dominion was no longer invincible. "Push forward," General's voice crackled over the radio. "All units advance, drive them off this planet." The counterattack swept across Prime like a tide. Human soldiers and fighters advanced together, reclaiming city after city. Forces that tried to make stands were overwhelmed. Forces that surrendered were taken prisoner, something that had never happened before. High Commander Vex was found in the ruins of the capital city. He had been wounded in the previous day's fighting and had refused to evacuate. When human soldiers reached him, he was surrounded by the bodies of his personal guard, all of whom had died protecting him. Vex looked up at the humans standing over him. His armor was shattered. His body was broken, but his eyes still burned with defiance. "Kill me," he said. "That is what I would do to you." The human sergeant in charge of the squad looked at the ancient warrior for a long moment. Then she shook her head. "No," she said. "We're not you. You're coming with us as a prisoner. You'll answer for what you've done." Vex did not understand. In all his centuries of warfare, he had never spared an enemy. The concept was foreign to him. "Why?" he asked. The sergeant considered the question. "Because showing mercy doesn't make us weak," she said. "It makes us human." Vex was taken into custody. He would eventually stand trial for crimes against multiple species. He would spend the rest of his life in a prison on a neutral world, with plenty of time to contemplate the species that had defeated him. The Battle of Prime was over. The Dominion had suffered its first major defeat in thousands of years. Over 600 of their ships had been destroyed or captured. Tens of thousands of their soldiers had been killed or taken prisoner. Their reputation of invincibility was shattered forever. The cost had been high. Humanity had lost 23 ships and over 12,000 soldiers. The Allied fleet had suffered similar casualties. They had lost millions of their people before help arrived. But they had won. Against all odds, they had won. Queen emerged from her bunker for the first time in 2 years. The sunlight hurt her eyes, but she did not care. She walked through the ruins of her capital city, seeing both destruction and hope everywhere she looked. Human soldiers were helping clear rubble. Civilians were emerging from hiding places, blinking in the light. Medical teams from a dozen species were treating the wounded. General found the Queen standing in front of what had once been the royal palace. It was mostly rubble now, but a single wall still stood, bearing the ancient seal of the people. "Your Majesty," said, offering a slight bow. Queen turned to face the human general. For a moment she could not speak. Tears streamed down her luminous face. "You came," she finally said. "We sent our signal into the darkness, hoping someone would hear, hoping someone would care, and you came." "Of course we did," replied. "You asked for help, how could we not answer?" The Queen shook her head slowly. "You do not understand. Many species heard our signal. Many species knew of our suffering. They did nothing. They were too afraid." "We were afraid too," admitted. "But fear isn't a reason not to do what's right. It's just an obstacle to overcome." Queen looked at the human woman with something approaching reverence. "Your species is remarkable. You come from a world that should have killed you. You evolved to survive against impossible odds. And when you reached the stars, you brought that spirit with you." "We're just people," said. "We do what we think is right and hope for the best." "No," the Queen disagreed. "You are more than that. You are warriors. You are hope made manifest." She reached out and took his hand in her own. "My people will never forget what you have done for us. The debt we owe cannot be repaid." "There is no debt," said firmly. "You needed help, we helped. That's what people do." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Admiral Stone. He had come down from orbit on one of the few functional shuttles remaining. He looked exhausted but satisfied. "Your Majesty," he said, offering his own bow, "I'm pleased to report that the fleet has completely withdrawn from the system. They're running back to Dominion space. Our allied fleet is pursuing, but we've ordered them not to engage further. We've won enough for today." "The Allies," Queen said. "I still cannot believe they came." "Neither can I, honestly," Stone admitted. "But they did. Ambassador told me something before the battle. He said that humanity reminded the galaxy what courage looks like. I think he was right." The three of them stood together among the ruins, watching as the sun rose higher over a world that had been saved from destruction. It was a beautiful sunrise, one of many that they would now live to see. The news of the Battle of Prime spread across the galaxy within days. Every species, on every world, heard the story. The mighty Dominion, undefeated for, had been broken by a coalition led by a young species from a backwater. The implications were enormous. The Dominion had maintained control over vast regions of space through fear. Other species obeyed because they believed resistance was impossible. Now they knew it was not. Rebellions broke out on a dozen Dominion-controlled worlds. Species that had been enslaved for generations rose up against their masters. The military, weakened by its losses at Prime and stretched thin across its territories, could not respond to all of them. Within a year, the Dominion had lost control of nearly a third of its territory. Within 5 years, it had collapsed entirely. The emperor himself was overthrown by a coup led by Younger, who understood that their species could no longer dominate through force alone. The galaxy entered a new era, an era of cooperation rather than conquest, an era where species worked together instead of preying upon each other. It was not perfect. Conflicts still occurred. Old hatred still simmered. But the fundamental nature of galactic civilization had changed. And at the center of this change was humanity, the species that had answered a desperate signal from the void and changed everything. David returned to Earth 6 months after the battle. He had been offered a medal and a promotion. He accepted both, though they did not mean as much to him as seeing his family again. His mother cried when she saw him. His father nodded and placed a hand on his shoulder, just as he had when David left. Was it worth it? His mother asked through her tears. David thought about the question. He thought about the friends he had lost, the things he had seen, the things he had done. He thought about the fear and the pain and the exhaustion. Then he thought about the child who had hugged his leg. He thought about Queen standing in the ruins of her city, watching the sunrise. He thought about a galaxy that had found the courage to stand together against tyranny. Yes, he said, it was worth it. Maria Santos recovered from her injuries, though she walked with a limp for the rest of her life. She stayed in the military, eventually becoming a general herself. She often spoke to young soldiers about the importance of fighting for what was right, even when the odds seemed impossible. Admiral Stone retired from active duty after Prime. He spent his remaining years teaching at the Naval Academy, sharing his experiences with the next generation of officers. He died peacefully at the age of 91, surrounded by family and former crew members. General became the highest-ranking military officer in human history. She served as the first Supreme Commander of the Allied Defense Force, the military organization that grew out of the coalition that had fought at Prime. Under her leadership, the galaxy became safer than it had ever been. Queen lived to see her world rebuilt. The Never forgot their debt to humanity, even though humans insisted there was no debt to pay. When a monument was erected in the capital city to commemorate the liberation, it featured a human soldier and a fighter standing side by side, facing the future together. Ambassador, the who had initially advised humanity against helping became one of Earth's strongest allies. He spent the rest of his existence advocating for cooperation between species. He often quoted a human saying that he had grown to love. No one is free while others are oppressed. Those who survived the fall of their dominion had to find a new way of life. Some joined the allied community, contributing their considerable skills to peaceful endeavors. Others retreated to their home systems, bitter and broken. A few continued to dream of conquest, but they were never again strong enough to threaten the galaxy. High Commander Vex, during his long imprisonment, wrote his memoirs. They were translated into dozens of languages and became required reading at military academies throughout known space. The final words of his book were a warning and an acknowledgement. I spent my life believing that strength was the only thing that mattered, that the strong had the right to dominate the weak, that mercy was weakness, that compassion was foolishness. I was wrong. The humans taught me that. They came from a world that should have killed them, and they used their strength not to conquer but to protect. They were stronger than us not because of their muscles or their weapons but because of their hearts. If you face them in battle, you will lose. Not because they are unbeatable, but because they will never stop fighting for what they believe in. That is what makes them truly dangerous. That is what makes them human. The signal that had started everything was preserved in the archives of every major civilization. It became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest times, help might come from the most unexpected places. Decades after the battle, a young student asked her teacher why the humans had come. Why had they risked everything for a species they had never met? The teacher, an elderly who had been a child during the invasion, smiled at the question. I asked a human soldier the same thing once, she said. Do you know what he told me? The student shook her head. He said that when he was young, his mother told him a story about someone who was hurting and needed help. And in the story, a stranger came and helped them, even though it would have been easier to walk away. His mother asked him what he thought of the stranger. He said the stranger was a hero. His mother shook her head. She said the stranger was not a hero. The stranger was just a good person. Heroes do impossible things. Good people do the right thing. And sometimes, the right thing is exactly what someone else needs. The student considered this. So the humans are good people. The humans, the teacher said, they evolved on a world that tried to kill them every day. They learned to survive. They learned to fight. They learned to never give up. But somewhere along the way, they also learned something else. They learned to care about each other. And then when they reached the stars, they learned to care about everyone else too. She looked out the window at the rebuilt city, at the statues and monuments commemorating the liberation. That is what makes them special, not their strength or their technology or their weapons, but their hearts. They have the hearts that have been forged in fire and tempered by struggle, hearts that know what it means to suffer and therefore understand the suffering of others. The student nodded slowly, beginning to understand. The signal pierced through space, the teacher continued, calling for help across unimaginable distances, and they answered. They answered with fury, yes, but also with compassion, with courage, with love. They taught the galaxy that these things are not weaknesses, they are the greatest strengths of all. Outside, the sun was setting over Prime. The sky turned colors that humans would have found strange but beautiful. Somewhere in that sky, ships from dozens of species traveled peacefully between the stars. The universe was vast and ancient and full of wonders. And in that universe, on a small planet called Earth, the species known as humanity continued to do what it had always done. They survived, they persevered, they reached for the stars. And when someone cried for help, they answered. Always. Because that was what good people did. That was what did. That was what it meant to be human. And somewhere in the darkness between the stars, new signals were being sent. New calls for help. New cries of desperation. Humanity was listening. They always would be.